Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by. Welcome to the BIA Knowledge Leadership webinar. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. Should you wish to ask a question during the presentation, please use the chat feature located in the left-hand corner of your screen. If you need to reach an operator at any time, please press star, then 0. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded Thursday, July 22nd, 2016. I would now like to turn the conference over to Mr. Mark McDonald. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Karen. Ladies and gentlemen, Karen Melchiore, Ready Talks Best of the Best. We'd like to thank everyone for being here today. My name is Mark McDonald, VP of Sales here at BIA. And an extra special thanks to our speakers today. Each are experts in their respective fields. Gentlemen, we're thrilled to have you here and excited to get into the webinar. I'm going to start things off by stating the obvious, and that's that project management is an art and a science. In our industry, project management is the glue that holds this complicated process together. And to say that PMs are worth their weight in gold is a serious understatement. They're truly the air traffic controllers. So today we're going to dedicate this program to project management everywhere, project managers everywhere, I should say. And let's introduce our presenters. To my right is Michael Quartararo. Michael is the Director of Litigation Support Services at Stroock Stroock Lavan. Michael is an author, a teacher, a project management professional and technologist with more than 18 years of experience in the legal services industry, managing securities, class actions, international litigation, as well as complex and technical projects regarding eDiscovery, forensics. Mike's considered an expert in his field, of course. He's responsible for the development and implementation of firm policy related to the use of technology across multiple practice areas, including litigation, financial restructuring, and IP. He's a member of the FIRD's administrative team and oversees the operation of full-service litigation support department. Mike holds various creds like the PMP and CEDS certifications. He's a teacher, project management at Bryan University. And Mike now offers advanced degrees in paralegal science, specializing in eDiscovery, correct?
Yes, that's right. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me. Bryan University has a paralegal science degree with a specialty in eDiscovery, and recently brought on board a Bachelor of Science degree, also in paralegal science, with, again, even more concentration in electronic discovery.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Mike, we're so happy to have you here. And with Mike today is Adam Feinberg. Adam Feinberg is SVP of Professional Services here at BIA, has extensive experience and background in technology, and provides expert witness testimony in courts and services as lead examiner on many high-profile digital and forensic investigations and audits. As SVP of Professional Services, Adam oversees all of BIA's project management and technical services, forensic data acquisition team, and doc review and support. So Adam's got a lot of experience in this field as well in project management. I'd like to remind the attendees today that this is being recorded. We're going to ask also that you send any questions you have via the chat box that could be shared with the panelists, and when we get to the end of the presentation, we'll field a few of those questions for the team here. And we have a post-webinar survey that if you will quickly fill out, it's short and sweet, but by doing that you'll receive the attachments from today's presentation that the gentleman will talk about. This presentation today is not CLE certified, however, everybody who attends will receive a certificate, so you can self-report if that's applicable to you. And with that, let's get things started, gentlemen. I'm going to pass it over to you, Adam.
Thanks, Mark, for the introduction, and Mike, again, a pleasure working with you today during this webinar. If you all look at your screens, there's a quick survey we'd like you to fill out in the next minute or so before we continue, just so that we can gauge experience of our attendees as it relates to project management experience. So while you're doing that, Mike, why did you write this book, and why did you think this was the right time?
So I wrote project management and electronic discovery. Well, let me back up. The primary motivation for the book was several years ago. I was approached by Bryan University to design a curriculum for project management and electronic discovery, and try as we might, we couldn't find a book. So sitting around with the advisory board members, someone said, "Hey, Mike, you should write a book." And I said, "Yeah, I'll get right on that." And 3.5 years later, the results, you guys can't see it at home, but it's sitting on the table here. It was an interesting challenge to write a book about a subject that, one, most people don't care about and the rest don't really know about. The goal here was to merge project management with the sort of standard processes of electronic discovery. And I think the book does that. I think that answers your question.
Okay, great. So I want to thank the participants for their answers. I'm just going to click on the results so people can kind of see behind the scenes what's been added so far. So it looks like a vast majority of people on the call do have at least some, if not a lot, of project management experience. So I guess as we continue, I guess we have to first define some concepts, right, and terms.
We should.
So the next couple pages we'll be doing that. So let's talk about what project management is.
So project management is one of those, it's a structured discipline, and there's a number of other parts to project management, and it branches off in a couple of different ways. But at the end of the day, project management, it's not just sort of this thing. It's a tool, right, to get something done, to help you get something done. There is structure to it. It is part art, as Mark said, part science. It can get very complicated when you're doing calculations and math and earned quality values but the beauty about project management is it's very fungible, it's very usable and not usable. You can transpose it over any industry. And I'd like to just clear up one thing too. People ask me all the time, what does project management got to do with anything legal anyway? And I think what's important to understand is project management is project management. It can apply to any industry, and you see it perhaps more commonly in things like construction or the design of a Apollo spaceship and stuff like that, NASA, right? But project management is not just some sort of thing that it's more of a way of thinking, is what I like to call it. It's an operational theory, a series of practices, if you will. Sure, there are principles, there are defined practices, there are some of the best things you can do, some of the worst things you can do. But at the end of the day, it's a series of tools and techniques that you overlay no matter what industry you're in, and you can use them to be more efficient and productive.
So at its basic, it's really a plan, right? In order to get something done, you have to have a plan, right? And whether that's just a checklist of 5 things to go to the grocery store, you're managing that project.
Exactly.
That you have to do, and as you add complexity and more, we'll go into more of these pieces, that's when some of these other skill sets or things you have to look at come into play.
Absolutely. Project managers love checklists, and we're going to get into a checklist in a little bit. It's also important people understand how broad the field of project management really is. There's over 500,000, 500,000 certified project managers around the world in various different industries. What's particularly interesting to us is that there are very few in our industry. All of our project managers are sort of grown organically, right? We train them, we teach them what we can, we move them up the ranks, and they become project managers, and we're working in an industry which, previously really didn't have project managers. But if you really think about it, anybody in our business could be a project manager. It could be a paralegal. It could be a eDiscovery lit support type person. It could be an attorney. We're all project managers. What project managers do is solve problems. At the end of the day, that's what we do. So there you have it.
So we have
We're done. Mic drop.
So in this slide we talk about a couple of items. There's the actual project. That's the discrete tasks that have to get executed.
Right. So this is important, and I'm vehemently opposed to reading slides on a screen. But here, there's something very important that I need to read. Truly defined project management, and this is my definition. It's a combination of a couple of different definitions that I've seen and read over the years. Project management is the structured application of skill, knowledge, tools, and techniques to organize activities and tasks designed to efficiently bring about a desired outcome that meets a business need. So a business need could be a lawsuit, could be a need to collect data from a client, it could be a need to complete a transaction, a merger of two companies. Those are business needs. It's also a business need to design and build a car or a house for those businesses. So you see the point here, right? Some of the other concepts here I'm just going to summarize briefly because it's important to understand what is a project and what isn't a project. So a project is something that's routine, something that is temporary, not routine. So you would compare it to sort of the operations of a company, right? Generating an invoice for the purchase of something is not a project. Designing a system to track and make sure invoices are paid would be a project. Does everybody see that distinction between sort of something that's temporary and something that's ongoing operations or continuous, right? That's important, right?
So the difference between an individual task request and a chain of requests that have to follow some kind of process from start to completion.
Exactly. All projects have a start and a finish, right? Operations don't.
So that takes us into our next slide, which is a life cycle, right? So you just said that something has to have a start and an end, and obviously things happen in between.
Right. So the traditional project management life cycle, and for those who are getting project management education in other places, and there are plenty of places to get it. Various universities offer it. Some offer a preparation for the most common, the PMI, Project Management Institute's Project Management Professional certification. But plenty of schools teach project management, and they teach it in many different ways. To me, the most cohesive, the most sensible model is the PMI model, so I stick with that. And people will say, well, some of these PMI principles apply and some of them don't, and then that's true of all of project management. It's not, again, it's not just this one sort of tool that you overlay over something and magic happens and things get done. That's not how it works. It's a matter of picking the tools that get the job done. But the project management life cycle is really about initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. So in initiating, what you're asking is, should we take on this project? What are the alternatives? Do we have the necessary agreements in place? What risks do we face if we take this on? It's asking the question, should we do this at all, right? And sometimes that question is, do we do it ourselves or we have somebody else do it for us, right? So that's a question you ask yourself in initiating. Planning, all good project managers start at the end. That's just a fact of project management. What does done look like? It's the most common question for all project managers.
Yeah, here at BIA, we have you always have to keep the end in mind, or
exactly.
What's the end result first?
Seems a little counterintuitive, but in order to know where you're going, you got to know how to get there. You just have to know the destination. Ask yourself, what resources do you need? How much is it going to cost? Prepare a work breakdown structure. There's a concept in project management called expert judgment. And expert judgment, it sounds fancy and everything, but it's really just a matter of applying your experience to a particular set of circumstances. So if I'm in the business of collecting data forensically, and you would know this, Adam, your expert judgment are the steps that it takes to properly collect the data. So if I'm planning a project, I want you to tell me what are the 10 things I need to do so I don't mess this up, right? That's breaking down your work. That's decomposition is another term we use in project management. And so it's important to properly plan any project. I think that goes without saying. Executing is where you begin your project work and start preparing deliverables. Sometimes there are sub-deliverables. Don't think about things in terms of, the project is the project, right? So you have the start, you have the finish. You know what done looks like. But it's quite common to have multiple sub-projects within a project. Right? That's important to understand because each of those may have a deliverable. So when we talk about deliverables, it may be a sub-deliverable of the final end result, which is it's important to understand.
Right. So to use something that I think all of our listeners today will understand, the project is to collect data from 5 custodians, get that processed, get it filtered, and get it delivered to review so the attorneys can do their next steps and then get everything ready for production.
Exactly.
Right, so I think that's probably something everybody on this call has had experience with.
Right.
When it comes to each one of those phases, well, a deliverable in the first phases, you have to get the data collected and then deliver that to the place where it has to get processed.
Correct.
Who and what is doing that? Then once it's processed and normalized, how are we going to filter and search? How are we going to report? How are we going to reiterate, right? So that is all part of your plan, right, and part of your execution.
Yes.
The next step, monitoring and control, things don't always go right, right? So let's talk a moment about that.
So monitoring and control is where you're asking questions like, are we on time? Are we on budget? You're managing change. Anybody who works in the legal business knows that projects go off the rails all the time. Unexpected things occur. We even have terms of art in the industry. Exceptions are a perfect example, right? You never know what the hell's going to be in an exception. It might be the smoking gun document that for some reason somebody changed the file extension or the file got corrupted and it's out the window. Those kinds of things come up. Monitoring and controlling is all about keeping the project on track, and most importantly, in my view, maintaining quality. That's what monitoring and controlling is about.
And then obviously, having the end in mind, you have to know when you're done, right, with your project. And again, it could be a piece of a project or just the project at large.
Right. And closing is an opportunity. As much as it's a project coming to an end, closing is an opportunity to learn things. And I think people don't take advantage of closing as much as they should. It's the point in a project where you finally get to breathe, take some time, reflect, record metrics. This industry really doesn't work well, the electronic discovery industry, the litigation support, practice support industry. It really doesn't work well if you don't have good metrics that are helping you to understand, to measure your success and your failures. Closing is where you document what you did, where you record your metrics, and you have a conversation about the things that you learned, what went right, what went wrong. That's what closing is about.
Right. So, it's often called a postmortem.
Correct.
In a lot of industries. And I think a lot of times people focus on the wrong that happened, and yes, that happens. But I think if we also focus a lot on the what went right, we can do more of the what went right on the next project.
That's exactly right.
Limiting the what went wrong.
I want to spend 2 seconds, if you could just back up one second. I want to spend 2 seconds talking about a very important word on that last slide, and that's called process. Okay?
Back there. There we go.
It may be the most important project management word that we're going to learn today, and it's really a simple word, but when people toss this word around, and sometimes people have to think about what it really means. Process is really just identifying the steps, the tasks, the operations, what it's going to take to achieve. You have to have a process, right? Adam talked a little bit about collection and the steps that you go through. That's the process for collection, right? So that's important to keep in mind. What are the steps? What tools and techniques are you going to use? What is the outcome of the process? That's very important to understand that concept. It's the foundation of project management.
Okay, so every project, you can design it, you can build your plan, you can build your workflow, have the process in place, but now you have to start collecting things, gathering things, whether again that's email or loose documents from a computer, reports from databases, or scan docs, right? We call those things inputs. Those are things that are going to start feeding the system.
Correct.
Right?
Your inputs are the information that you need to move the project forward. You cannot start a collection without the names of the custodians. the data sources that you're going to collect from. Those are inputs, right? Any documentation that comes with that, whether it's a list of passwords or machine names or server locations, URLs, whatever, those are inputs that you need in the process.
And sometimes the input is, hey, I need to go collect 5 custodians for this case, in which case the project manager then has to go out and figure out what that input is.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and that's where the value of the project manager, engaging the stakeholder at the organization, bringing in the lawyers, bringing in IT, bringing in who they need to bear to help gather. Oftentimes the initial data gathering doesn't happen, and PM is forced to put all that together. Right.
Right, and so that's, in addition to the inputs, you move right into tools and techniques. These are the systems, the tools, the equipment that you're going to need to perform the actual tasks in question. So in the case of a collection, for instance, you're going to use some write-protected hardware or software that doesn't change all the files while you collect them. Tools and techniques also involve resources, and again, this fancy word, expert judgment, right? You use your expert judgment as a forensic expert to perform this collection in a way that it makes it sound and defensible, right? That's one of your tools in your toolkit, okay? I may be, an attorney that is sort of at the head of the project. I'm a stakeholder, right? We forgot to define stakeholders. We should come back to that.
Sure.
But I rely on you for your expertise. I rely on you to apply the tools, right? So that's very important that these 3 things, inputs, tools, techniques, and we're going to talk about outputs in a minute.
Yeah, and again, I think tools and techniques are important because there are many ways to execute. There are many technologies to execute. But if you don't know what a lot of those tools are and you don't often think out of the box, if all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. So you're not building elegant solutions to solve your problems, right?
That's exactly right.
And that ripples along the way.
Exactly right.
And then now that we've started collecting the information or processing the data, now it's time to move to next step, engage other teams, right, with those outputs
right.
for next steps.
And there's a couple of additional things, and one thing that I just thought of that's actually missing here. In my experience, the single most common point of failure in any project is communication. And I didn't list it here, oversight on my part, but it kind of falls into roles and responsibilities. It's important that everybody understand what everybody's role in the process is, right? It can get real confusing if a project doesn't have a leader, and good project managers need to just have this certain sort of intrinsic quality that it's not something you learn or it could even be taught. It's something that you sort of have, and you display leadership qualities. You know when to step in. You have the ability to interrupt, a very high-minded attorney, for instance, or someone with an enormous ego, but at the same time, take someone who's shy and demure and lift them up and empower them. There's a certain quality to really good project managers that sort of finds all the different missing pieces and keeps communication and roles and responsibilities in check.
So as we continue on this thread, Mike, stakeholders, that also fits into roles and responsibilities.
Absolutely.
There's a corporate stakeholder, the person at the organization who's overall responsible for making this project happen, and they're going to bring their resources to bear within the organization. But there are multiple roles and responsibilities on the client end, on the firm, and on the vendor side.
And all of those people are stakeholders. A stakeholder is anybody with an interest in the project. It's that simple. Right. Whether it's the client who's paying the bill, or the client who's getting sued, or the paralegal at the client, or the paralegal at the firm, or the associate, the partner, the firm itself is a stakeholder, the corporation itself is a stakeholder. Everybody's a stakeholder. You, as the forensic examiner making the collection, are a stakeholder. And it's important to understand that, but it's also important to understand the sort of structure of those roles and everybody doing their part. That's what project management is all about. And keeping communication in check, keeping things transparent, that's what makes good electronic discovery projects move forward well.
And the lead project manager is responsible for communicating all of these individual roles and responsibilities to the whole team.
Exactly.
And who needs to do what by when, and if there's an issue, who to escalate to, so that you don't get stuck. You may get stuck sometimes, but at least the project can...
Project manager drives the project forward, handles most of the communication, reports status on a regular basis to your top-tier stakeholders. The engagement partner doesn't want to really know what, Adam is doing in the course of the collection. He just wants to know the data has been collected on time, on cost, and the project is moving forward, right? So that's very important for the project manager to maintain that, keep that status updated, report back to the stakeholders on a regular basis.
And actually, let me go back one more. Again, part of the plan, oftentimes, and I'm sure many people can relate on the call, you get that phone call, we have to collect 20 custodians by Friday. We don't know where they are. We don't know what equipment they have. Obviously, as part of the project plan, you have to know the environmentals. You have to know what sources you're hitting. You have to be very upfront and very vocal about if we don't have information early, we may not meet a deadline that you've just imposed. So don't be shy about communicating often and more often.
That's exactly right. And so really quickly, those two terms on the bottom of the screen, environmental factors are really talking about the culture of either a corporate organization or a law firm, and the sort of politics of the organization and how it runs. Organizational process assets sounds like this big fancy word, but what we're really talking about there are the tools that you have at your disposal, whether it's a checklist or a piece of software or project management software or some spreadsheet you're keeping. Process assets are tools that help you move the process forward.
Okay, so we'll move forward. Like we said, there are many areas of management that happen during a project.
Exactly.
Right? Because there are many components. You talked about scope, you talked about time, you talked about cost. You also talked about quality, right? You can do any project you want, but if the quality was horrible, well, you didn't help anybody, right? In finishing the project. So there are a few more things, but let's just spend a minute or two talking on these.
So in addition to the process groups, the 5 process groups that we discussed a little earlier, initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing, those 5 process groups each contain these knowledge areas. And they call them knowledge areas. They're the core components of any project, and they help structure and categorize each process area. So it's important to that you know these things, and if you use them in this way, and again, not all project management principles are going to apply in all circumstances, but it's important that you be able to pick and choose the tools. The 3 I want to highlight today are scope, time, and cost, because those are the 3 sort of foundational principles. They're what brought project management about. And if you see the little triangle on the screen, it's represented by a triangle for a very good reason. Because if anybody looks at a triangle and you either expand the scope of a project or reduce the time, any one of those angles on the triangle changing will affect the other, and you have to be able to adapt to that change and understand how that impacts it. So scope management is what is this project about. Time is how much time do we have to do it. Cost, obviously, is what it's going to cost. Managing quality, human resource management, communication management, risk management, procurement management, which is a fancy way for saying outsourcing, and stakeholder management. These are all things that you're going to be concerned about as you move through each of the 5 process groups. So in initiating, or let's use planning, which is really where you're going to start to focus on scope, you're going to start to figure out what needs to happen to get this project done. You're going to start figuring out what it costs by using tools like estimating and preparing a budget. You're going to figure out where things can go off the rails so that you could prevent those things in quality management.
Plan for the unplanned.
Plan for the unplanned. You figure out what human resources you need. You're going to look at risks and say, what could go wrong, where and when, and what do I do if it does? Right? That's risk management in a nutshell. And I should say, parenthetically, risk management is a species all its own, right? There's a whole universe of certifications and credentials that apply to risk management that we don't have time to get into today. But the important thing to understand is these knowledge areas they have to be consistently integrated and managed with the 5 process groups, okay? Project manager is responsible for each of the inputs, tools, techniques, and outputs in each of the knowledge areas. Anybody who wants to read further on this can obviously go to the PMI website, order the project management body of knowledge, which is the Bible for PMI certified project managers.
So I don't want people listening in here to be afraid, oh my God, there's so much here.
Wait till you see the book.
Right, no, but I'm just saying from a more simplistic viewpoint, scope management is, okay, get a 3-ring binder, print out the list of the 5 custodians and who you're supposed to contact. Time management, print out another piece of paper with, you're supposed to get it done by August 1st. And cost management, this project is $10,000. Guess what? You know what those 3 things are. Check off that you collected the 5 custodians. Check off that you're on budget and you're spending the money. And how close are we? So again, we're talking about some big concepts here. But again, from a simplistic view, it's really just being organized with the information that you have and just managing that information, right?
That's exactly right.
And all of these things is not you. You could have a team of 3 or 4 people assisting you.
That's exactly right.
With the rest of these items. So we've all seen the eDRM model for quite a number of years and the revisions that have happened. So we're all familiar with this. Let's just...
I should say, recently eDRM blew up the information governance on the extreme left side there and put the IGRC model in there. And I intentionally left it out because it just takes up too much space on the screen.
So we'll just move in a little bit into some of the real world, right? So we talked about project management, about being organized, having the documentation, things of that nature, knowing where you're going to end up. Let's talk about some more practical day-to-day things.
Right. So, and I cover some of this in the book. It's at the end of the day, an electronic discovery project really comes down to identification, collection, processing, review, and production, right? That's what a project manager working electronic discovery does. That's where the bulk of the work goes on. So some people may be saying, well, what did you do to information governance? You just got rid of it? No, I didn't get rid of it. It's a different sort of animal, right? First of all, if you're working in a law firm, and I'll talk about corporate in a minute, if you're working at a law firm, aside from perhaps helping to manage the information governance needs of the law firm, when you're involved in an electronic discovery project, you're going to be collecting 99% of the time data from clients. The client is responsible for information governance, not you. Your firm may advise, you may even consult yourself on some level in the development of their information governance practices and policies, but the fact is that information governance is not something that you as a project manager are going to get involved in while you are moving an eDiscovery project forward. Information governance is something that should be in place already, right? So I'm not disregarding it. I'm saying that it's not a core component of what we need to do to move a project forward.
Our day-to-day.
Yeah.
In project management.
And the same can be said for presentation, right? So anybody's, for several years I managed trials and hot-seated trials at another firm, and so anybody who's worked on a trial knows that a trial is a different animal altogether. It's completely unpredictable. It is absolutely time-consuming and exhausting.
It's a project unto its own with its own scope,
It is a project unto its own. That's the perfect way to put it. So that's why we sort of lopped off the right and the left sides of the eDRM and said, you know what, where's the core of what we're doing? So that's why we say this slide, the real focus is on those 5 things that lie in the middle of the eDRM, and that's where not only my book, but we intend to refocus this webinar.
Great. So why merge the two? I understand what you've been saying, right? Project management in eDiscovery or in litigation support has kind of been trial by fire, grown organically, ad hoc. You see a value in overlaying some more structure to this, right?
I do. First of all, project management is a proven methodology, and for those who don't know, there are several different methodologies in the project management world. There's Agile, Six Sigma. I focus on the traditional model of project management because it gives me the widest tool set. Anybody working in this industry knows how sort of haphazard it can be, how ad hoc it can be from time to time. But the fact of the matter is, and we're going to show you some task lists in a minute, the fact of the matter is much of what we do is sort of the same thing over and over for each different project, for each different case. We take similar steps to get things done in a sound and defensible way. It goes without saying that planning is always better than not planning. And having a structure enhances communication. It makes the process more defensible, and the ultimate reason for using project management is because it's more efficient. It saves time and money. People get accustomed to using the same tasks, to following the same protocols, to adhering to the same best practices, and the process gets more and more automated. I'm not saying that eDiscovery can be entirely commoditized. I'm saying that a series of structured steps makes it defensible, makes it efficient. That's what I'm saying.
And the more, I won't say the more steps, because you can sometimes go too many steps, right? But the more structured you are about it, the more you know about it, the less opportunity for missing something. And the missing something is really what gets you in trouble, right? Because you don't have those checks and balances.
Yes.
So let's go on to some of those processes in the eDiscovery project management model, as you're calling it.
What I've sort of designed, without any claim to ownership really, is the core aspects of the electronic discovery reference model. And what I like to do is take the project management process groups and knowledge areas and integrate them together, right? So that's been my goal, and it's been a question that people have always asked, Mike, how do I use project management across the EDRM? Well, there's a reason we took IG and preservation and put them aside. First of all, it makes it a little simpler to look at. If we're just focused on 5 processes, now what we do, if we skip ahead.
Right, so in Africa you have the big 5 animals you want to see, and in eDiscovery we have the big 5 processes we have to handle, right?
So if anybody who's looking at the EDRM model will note that it moves from side to side across these processes, right? But what I'm suggesting is, instead of moving from side to side, move in a down and over method, right? And if you keep moving through these slides...
So I'm starting to see a little bit of a trend here, Mike.
Exactly. It's very trendy.
Repeatable process, right?
Repeatable process. So when you're identifying and preserving data, start by initiating. Who are the custodians? Where am I going to collect it? Plan it out. Execute, monitor, control. Close that part of it. Move on to collection. Now, in comes Adam. He initiates, he plans, he executes, monitoring, control, close the collection. Right? So instead, again, of moving across the EDRM, move down and over. Use the project management process groups to guide each sub-project of a larger project. Does that make sense, Adam?
It absolutely does. So, you talked about communications, efficiencies, some of those core things, time management. Talk a minute about how, following this kind of a methodology, it assists you in all of those communications/management controls that you're putting in place.
So for each of these process groups, and let's just take collection. I keep going back to collection because you're in collections primarily.
And that's where everything starts.
Right.
Right.
So yeah, that's a perfect example. If you get something wrong in collection, you can really have a problem down the road. So in each of for a collection project or sub-project, if you will, you start initiating a project. You start by identifying who your stakeholders are, identifying what done looks like, plan to travel to your custodians or bring your custodians' machines to you, execute, actually perform the collection, monitor, control. You do things during collection like hash files to make sure that they don't change during the process. That's a quality control measure. I know people don't really think about it like that, but it's a validation that the file was like this when I got it, and now it's like exactly the same because the hash values match. That's important.
And if your tools, one of your tools are drag and drop, you kind of lose that quality.
Right.
Using that kind of a tool in your toolbox, right?
That's correct. And sometimes that's understood, and that's fine.
But everyone has to be communicated.
Exactly. It should be transparent. And then close the project. Did anything go wrong on the collection? Is there anything that you could have done better? Could you have used a different tool to prevent something from happening that happened? It's really just walking through those initiating planning, executing, monitoring, and closing steps for each sub-project of the overall project. And those include the knowledge areas, right? Identify who's the lead. That's where the communications come from. That's the person who reports status to stakeholders. It's no different whether you're in processing or in review, for instance. If you are managing a document review as a project manager, the attorneys who are performing the review, they may not report to you directly. There may be some lawyer in charge of the overall review, but you're there to manage the database, to make sure things are moving along, to do quality checks, report on progress, any number of those things. Again, feeding that information up to the stakeholders, whether that's a lead attorney or communicating challenges to the reviewers if there's some issue that needs to be conveyed to all of them. That's a project manager's job during review.
So I want to go back and talk about something from a few slides ago about inputs. And I think we were, it can be a bit dry because a lot of the inputs we're talking about 0 and 1 type inputs, email, loose files, scan docs, things like that. But talk a minute about the human inputs. Whether that's the exchange administrator or some knowledge system within an organization. Talk about bringing in those other human factors that we need to talk about.
So at any phase of the project, you're gonna need input from a number of different people. As you said, the exchange administrator, maybe a network administrator. You may need to talk with a functional manager. Lawyers might conduct actual custodian interviews during or prior to collection. Those are all kinds of human inputs that you're going to need in order to complete the identification, preservation, and then ultimately the collection. And I'm sure there are others that I'm not thinking of at the moment, but those are where you're going to have the most human inputs. Processing, not so much, right? You've got the data. The data is what the data is. There's not a lot of human inputs there. There's a technician that's doing that processing, monitoring that project, that processing, and hopefully timely reporting that up to the project manager, who's then disseminating status to the case team.
Sure, but processing can be tricky. And as an example, we're doing some collections from some companies, small companies, and they use Peachtree and QuickBooks databases, right? So they're providing us with the backups of those databases, and they're getting processed, and they're being brought up to review. But the Peachtree database is 50 files of an IDX file, all these strange file formats that are not actually reviewable.
Right.
Right? So, again, as part of your project management responsibility, understanding the inputs, certain pieces of data may need to take an alternate path to get to review, because those kind of systems, you may actually have to install Peachtree, run reports, and then those reports end up what's in the document review.
So in any project, in any undertaking, anywhere in your life, you might hit a bump in the road or a pothole or make a left when you should have made a right. What's important is you be able to adapt to change, and that's another concept in project management called change management, right? Things don't always go the way we plan them, and you have to be prepared to adapt. I like to tell project managers that it's not how bad things went, it's how you reacted to how bad things went, right?
Right.
Because you can react sort of emotionally and have a temper tantrum and throw a fit, or you can think about it logically and say, how do I get this back on track? How do I get back into my project management processes, follow my knowledge areas, and get the tools that I need to get to done, right? that's what you need to do no matter what you're working on. And that's true in life as it is in eDiscovery.
And it's a lot easier to manage a problem or a mistake early and be upfront about it instead of dealing with it later when something worse happens, right?
So a tribute to project managers everywhere, and a piece of advice I would give everyone is to be completely transparent in your work. If there's a problem, communicate it to the case team. Let them know early so that you can get out in front of it. You know, it's not unlike politics these days. All kinds of crazy things hit the airwaves through our presidential election cycle, and you could see the ones who get out in front of those things and deal with them are the ones who are still standing. So it's true in electronic discovery as well.
Yeah, and when you say case team, again, there are people listening in on the vendor side, on the corporate side, on the law firm side. You know, certainly report back to your individual organization that you report to, but again, your team, your execution team on the project, everyone needs to know what's going on.
Absolutely.
So, Mike, we're going to wrap up here for a second, and then we'll go into questions. I just want to spend a second. Again, we've been talking throughout about your project management in electronic discovery that was published just recently. If people are interested in the book or want to communicate with you, they can go directly to eDiscoveryPM.com, and you've got all the normal ways to communicate with people there.
Absolutely.
As a thank you to everyone attending today, there are a couple of handouts that are going to be given when you fill out the survey. It's just 4 quick things at the end. One is a 2-page eDiscovery project management checklist that Mike has put together. Again, when you see it, there's a lot of repeating in there. You saw that in the previous slides about the silos that go up to the next silo that go to the next silo. Project management is about using repeatable processes and having ways of dealing with things when they kind of go askew. So that's a giveaway. There is also kind of the EDRM model with these PM management slices, giving a little bit more perspective as it relates to this specific conversation. So I think at this point, I know we have about 10 minutes left, and we have some questions. Mark, I know you've been fielding a few. You want me to throw out 1 or 2?
Go right ahead.
Sure. All right. So one question is, who should define the roles of the team members?
I think that's done collectively. That's the best way to do it. And it varies depending upon a lot of individual dynamics. There are lawyers with whom I have great working relationships, who consider me, a true equal and a colleague, who I can go into a meeting with and sort of dictate the terms of how things are going to go, and they know that I know what I'm doing, and they're going to accept what I say. There are other lawyers, other stakeholders, where I'm not going to have that, they're not going to have that comfort level with me. They're not going to let me dictate terms. They're going to say, here's how it's going to go, and I'm going to have to sort of push back and cajole a little bit and say, oh, here's a better way to do it, and put this person in charge of that part and let this person work on that. So it's a bit of a game that you play. Game is the wrong word, but you know what I mean. It's a process. You have to sort of negotiate that. But the point is to negotiate it, to identify who's the lead project manager, who's the senior associate, who's the billing partner. Understand who's in charge at the client. So if something goes off the rails there, understand who the IT people are at the client. Just identify these people and let everybody know what their roles are.
Right. And sometimes, at least from the law firm side, sometimes it's managed by an attorney. Sometimes it's managed by a paralegal. Sometimes it's managed by a lit support person. Mm-hmm. All 3 different skill sets, right? Sometimes a vendor, if they're deeply involved in most of those aspects, they may become the lead as it relates to the data movement, and then the case team manages the case, right? So again, I think the answer there is get together early and often, mm-hmm. Discuss it, and put together your team. Another question here is, what would you consider a regular basis update? To update, you're the vendor or you're the main PM, whoever it is. How often do you need to? There are a few different kind of communications. There's like discrete task communication,
right.
But there's also overall health of the project.
Right.
What are your thoughts there?
So I think there's a couple of points, and obviously we have about an hour for this webinar. We don't have a lot of time to get into all of the concepts that I would have liked to get into, but there's a concept in project management. It's sort of a common sense concept, but it's called milestones, and it's something you do in the planning stage of a project. You identify the milestones. On complex projects, you might even identify those points at which communication must take place. Mm-hmm. Right? On your typical sort of run-of-the-mill eDiscovery project, depending upon size and so forth, I would probably report after a collection is complete. If it's a particularly large project and there's a large collection, I might do a couple of reports during the collection process to say, hey, we're a third of the way done, we're 2/3 done, hey, we're finished.
Right? This week we collected these 7, next week. Correct.
And you provide some kind of updated rolling list of how much data is being collected, from who and from where, if you're in multiple locations and so on. So that would be sort of on a collection project. Processing, I think, is the project manager or the technical person who's doing the processing should just be sort of giving a general status, I would say halfway or 3/4 of the way through the project. We all provide estimates of time, and they're never perfect. Another good project management principle is to build in some reserve time, add 10 or 15% to whatever you're doing so that you've got some time and you don't go off the rails. If there's one thing I've learned about lawyers and other people who work in the legal system is that when you tell them something, they're expecting you to be there and have things done at that time. So the importance of building time into what you're doing. Give yourself some reserve. Granted, sometimes you're going to be rushed. Sometimes you're going to miss deadlines. That's just the nature of the beast. Again, I encourage transparency and openness there so that you don't find yourself getting yelled at for missing a deadline. And don't overpromise. It's something I've been guilty of before. We all tend to do it. Yeah, we all tend to do it. We think we can get something done, but you cannot sometimes anticipate everything that can go wrong. So as a general rule, status should be identify your milestones of the project, talk to your stakeholders, ask them when they want to hear from you. That's the best gauge. If they want to know when the collection is done, great. When the processing is done, perfect. During review, if you've got 100,000 documents to look at, give them, every couple of days, give them a status report.
So just to add, as the project manager, you have, or as an organization, you have your processes as to how you set up a project, how you organize the project, how you make your updates, when you update, when you do that weekly, if you do a weekly, what have you. Again, in your first call, here's how we do it, because if you ask your client, how do you want it, then for every client you'll be designing a whole new thing, right. And you can't manage that.
That's fair.
So again, as part of your processes and workflow, here's our way. You need me to add to it, great, but here's our framework because we found this to work. And we'll tweak it, but here's how we found it. So I think that probably answers that.
I have another question, too.
Please, Mark.
So this question, great question. PMs hold a tremendous amount of institutional knowledge. You see this, I'm sure, at the law firm. You've got project managers internally that might work on the same client over and over again. How, as a PM, do you account for, store, and use and recall that information?
So what I recommend is you build yourself, fancy phrase we used earlier, organizational process assets. One of your organizational process assets should be a knowledge base. You should have some kind of memorialization of historical things that happen either for a particular client or a project. Use a tracking log, use a database, use a spreadsheet if you have to, if you don't have anything else, or just keep good chronological notes on a project so that anything that's happening on a case or for a particular client or project someone else can step in and look at it and get up to speed fairly quickly.
So
and that's a great question.
I mentioned earlier that 3-ring binder for projects,
sure.
right? I mean, that's the most basic one. Certainly if people are more comfortable doing it electronically, but having that 3-ring binder.
You're showing your age by going back to paper.
Right.
So next question.
Every case has...
Sorry, I had to get that in there. What do you think is the most important characteristic for an eDiscovery project manager? The most important?
That's a tough question. That's one of the hardest questions, and I spend some time talking about it in the book because, and if anybody in our audience has read the first couple of chapters, it's in there. I remember struggling with it mightily because there are so many necessary characteristics of a good project manager. I don't know how many of them are absolutely essential. If I had to put my finger on any one thing, I would say communication skills.
Yeah, probably organizational right behind
written and oral communication skills. And it's not a characteristic, right? It's a skill.
Sure.
And I would say problem solver.
Yeah.
Because if you get frazzled easy and you can't see through for a solution, then it's also hard to stay and be on track.
I'm trying to answer the question as best I can and say which.
There's no one answer, right?
There is no one answer, but there's a difference between being able to write a sentence that someone else can comprehend and having good sort of leadership skills, right? Leadership skills are sort of a characteristic. Writing a sentence that someone else understands is kind of did you learn how to read and write in school? There's a difference there, and it's hard, but you know what? Everybody just buy the book. It's all in there.
That's right.
And I guess one last question that we have here, and I think we touched on it, is keeping a log of tasks undertaken, decision made a good idea, and if so, how granular, right? So, we touched upon either that 3-ring binder or some notebook you have or just a running log in a spreadsheet. Obviously, the more complex a project that you have, the harder it is to manage it there. You may have to have some case management or project management software or task management software that you can keep all your documentation, you can keep all the individual tasks, the comments and completions and issues you had with tasks, things of that nature. So you'll have to see what works for you as you go along.
That's exactly right. And just to expand on that a little bit, I spent a good amount of time compiling and sort of cleansing some of the appendices in the back of my book. There's checklists there, there's questionnaires there, there's logs there. I think it's always a good idea to have project documentation. Something as simple as if your attorneys don't have time to interview every single custodian on a big project, use a short questionnaire. Where do you store your data? What's the password for your machine? Who's your personal assistant? Just gathering basic information through a questionnaire and keeping that document on file can be incredibly helpful. As to a log itself and how granular it should be, I don't know that you want to write down every single decision you made on every single project. But there are some, again, high points and low points. Custodians, exception reports. Obviously something goes wrong, document it. If you had to speak to an employee about a disciplinary issue, managing human resources, document that. There's a number of things that you want to document throughout the process. Many of them are set forth in the checklist, which you will get after the webinar, and obviously some of that is set forth in my book. Yeah,
so please fill out the survey, everybody, and you'll get that. My takeaway, Mike, from this, and thank you again. This was
my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
My takeaway is there's a lot of information surrounding the whole project management role, but there are pieces you can start with very easily that are not complicated that will just make your job acting as a project manager go that much more smoothly for you and for your project. So thank you very much. Enjoy your vacation if you're having one the rest of the summer, and see you again soon.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Leah Green, and thank you, Karen. Everyone have a great day, and we'll see you soon.